at St. Anselm College. You're here in their space right now. Ann Cameron, who is the deputy director here, I want to say thank you, is co-hosting this with me. She and I dreamed up this program last October, and it took us a little while to bring it to you today, including snowstorms and town meetings that got in the way, but we're happy to be here with you. I'm going to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Betsy Fisher-Martin, who knows New Hampshire well and tells me that she loves New Hampshire, which of course endears her to all of us. She also is known and much appreciated by the NHIOP School of Communications. She was instrumental in helping us with our 2005 First Amendment Awards event, which is an annual event, which we do right here in this space each fall. Because her colleague, the late Tim Russert, was our keynote speaker at that event. And Betsy was the executive producer of the top-rated Sunday morning public affairs program, Meet the Press, which Tim Russert hosted. She worked there at Meet the Press for more than 22 years. And for those of you who are college students in the room, she started there as a senior in college as an intern. This was before she was promoted to an executive role at NBC, where she served as the managing editor of NBC News political programming and was responsible for the development and execution of network political coverage. She is an Emmy award-winning journalist, and she's here this evening as the executive director of American University's School of Public Affairs Women and Politics Institute. She has also founded her own consulting business, Fisher-Martin Media, where she specializes in providing media training for corporate executives. And she serves on the board of directors of Washington's International Women's Forum, the National Press Club's Journalism Institute. She's a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a member of the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum. Leading our conversation this evening is Dr. Jennifer Lucas, a St. Anselm College professor teaching American government, women in politics, congressional politics, social justice, and campaigns and elections. And she oversees the politics department's internship program. So for those of you in the room who are looking for interns, another great reason to know Jennifer. And each summer, she serves as a coordinator for New Leadership New England, a 5-day summer training program for undergraduate women designed to educate, engage, and empower young women for futures in public service. Jennifer has worked and interned on Capitol Hill, in Washington, D.C., and in the Massachusetts State House, and was a research assistant for the National Journal. So Betsy and Jennifer, meet your audience. The accomplished people gathered here this evening serve their communities and the state as elected officials, nonprofit executives, former and current congressional staffers, state employees, staff and volunteers for organizations focused on education, the First Amendment, women's health and safety, housing, healthy aging, climate resilience, philanthropy, and more. And we are fortunate also to have gathered here students from St. Anselm College. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I know it's a busy time of year. Some of you have assignments due. Some of those assignments are for Dr. Lucas. So thanks for being here, and we want to welcome Betsy and Jennifer to the stage.
All right, can you all hear me? Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much. I have the wonderful job of just being able to ask questions, which is my favorite part of the job. So we're going to jump right into it. Basically what we're going to do is Betsy's going to talk a little bit about some of the themes that came up during their survey, and then we'll have a little discussion about them, and then we'll move on to the next theme. And I promise that we'll save time at the end for audience questions, because it sounds like you all have really interesting things that you want to hear about, and I do as well. So I promise not to take up too much time. But we're really, really thrilled that you're all here. And I thought maybe before we jumped right into the survey results, if you want to talk a little bit about the Institute and why you decided to do this survey and what the goal was.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be with you all. I love New Hampshire, and great to see some old friends here. My first New Hampshire primary covering was in 1996. So I've been up here a lot, been in this room many times, and thrilled to be back with you all. So just to give you a little bit of background about the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and it's interesting because we're talking about Meet the Press. All those years that I worked at Meet the Press, I would always get the question, why don't you have more women on Meet the Press? And I was always very sensitive to that question, me obviously being a woman and a promoter of women. And the very simple answer was, and this is, late 90s, early 2000s, is the sort of people that we would have on Meet the Press, a newsmaking show, are newsmakers who are going to take a story and move it forward, like presidential candidates, committee chairs, leadership, governors, and there weren't a lot of women in those positions. And so it's interesting kind of coming full circle in my career, where I'm now running an institute on women in politics, which I feel very strongly about, because our mission is really to close that gender gap in political leadership and elect more women to office. And we are a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute as well. We do a couple of different things at the university. We do a lot of academic courses about women in politics that our undergrad and grad students can take, and if they take X number of them, they can graduate with a certificate in Women in Public Policy Leadership. We do a lot of programming and events, just like you all do here at the IOP, talking to women leaders. And we do some research. We do a Saturday morning newsletter called the We Lead Reader, all about women in politics. It's like a summation of news throughout the week about women in politics, only because I, as a consumer, wanted to read something that had a compilation of news about women in politics, and it didn't exist. So I said, oh, let's do it ourselves. So I have several grad students that work on that each week with us. And then, kind of to put our money where our mouth is, we do a campaign training program that's called We Lead for young women who want to run for office. And the women are between the ages of 25 and 35. They're not AU students. They are working on the Hill or in nonprofits or in PR firms or campaigns. And they've all expressed interest to want to run. And we spend one full Saturday a month with them for an academic year, and we do soup to nuts campaign training so that they can have the skills to actually run, because we know so much that women need extra encouragement to actually run. We need to be told you can do it, and we also, you all have heard the statistic when it applies to business, that if men see an advertisement for a job and they meet like 25% of the requirements, they're applying. Us women, we tend to want to have 95% of the requirements and qualifications before we apply. And I think the same thing is true for politics. And we know that when women run, women have an equal opportunity to actually win elections. It's just actually running that makes so much of a difference. And so we are proud to do that program as well. And then on the research side of it, we are partners with a terrific organization called the Barbara Lee Family Foundation. We came together on this project several years ago called Gender on the Ballot. And we have a blog, we have guest writers to the blog about women in politics, and we also do some research. And that's where this research that I'm happy to be here today to talk to you about is from. We've done a similar poll for the last couple of years about women and their political engagement, what issues matter more to them, how they feel about politics, how they feel about their own life financially, etc. And so we've had an interesting data point now over several years. We looked a lot during the pandemic at women who were burned out, and we did a study about women in the workplace and the changing of the new normal. And so as we approach 2024, and you all know this well from being in New Hampshire, it's starting already, we decided that this would be a good time to do a look ahead for women voters in the 2024 campaign and get a sense on what's on their mind. Little preview.
Yes, and there's some really, really interesting things, so maybe we should just jump right into it.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the first kind of theme, or talk a little bit about the methodology?
Yeah, I'll, my slides here. So we used a polling firm, Joel Benenson's firm, Benenson Strategies. Joel Benenson, those of you might know his name, he was the pollster for Obama and for the Hillary Clinton race, and has a very well-respected polling firm that has a lot of business clients, et cetera now. And so we teamed up with them for this poll. And we did 811 online interviews, you can see. We did an oversample of younger women because we wanted to try to look a little bit more in depth to what younger women were thinking. And you can see the margin of error, et cetera, up here on the methodology. So the first section that I thought we would kick off talking about was the economic landscape, how women are feeling right now. And it's interesting, you guys can appreciate this, who know my husband, Jonathan Martin, but if I'm in a bad mood or something when he comes home and say, how are you doing? I'll say, I'm not in a good place right now. It's a little bit of a warning. And that's how I feel women are thinking right now. We are not in a good place. Women, when asked, what describes your feelings about how things are going in the US right now, anxious and worried and frustrated are the top two. You can see there that hopeful is only 20%, and poor, happy, and proud are at the very bottom. And so women are not feeling like they're in a good place at all right now. And then we go ahead and let me flip to the next slide. The burnout factor. This was surprising to me because I thought the height of burnout would have been during the pandemic, especially any of you here with younger children at home, having to do teaching yourself, dealing with the pandemic. But women are saying now that they are significantly more burned out now than just a year ago. And we see those numbers especially among parents of young children. When you see the difference between them saying that in 2022, when we last did the survey to now, 60% overall said they are more burned out than usual, which is up 11 points since the last time we took the survey in 2022. So I was surprised about the burnout kind of continuing even post-pandemic. We also did an open-ended question and did a word cloud here and asked what word or phrase would you use to describe life in America today. And again, you can see the big words here: hard, difficult, struggle, messy, bad. Very few positive words. Words like nice and freedom are kind of drowned out in this response as well. And I think it underscores what we saw in some of the other questions. And then when we look at people's personal financial situations, many women, when they're asked about how they're feeling about the last couple years, their personal financial situation, you can see not so much. There's an increase between 2021, 22, and 23 of the number of women who say their personal financial situation has actually gotten worse, which again was somewhat surprising to me as well. And that's driven a lot by Latina women. 62% said that their financial situation has actually gotten worse. And so we see this kind of pessimism right now in the economy, and this kind of can translate to this personal financial situation because of inflation. We asked what women are doing because of inflation. How has it impacted their spending, their daily lives? And a lot of them, nearly half, say that they are actually cutting back on necessities like groceries, using their AC less. Of course, the easy one that everybody does when they're minding their financial situation is cutting back on restaurants. But again, 1 in 5 say they've actually delayed or canceled health screenings because of it. So it has more of an impact than just not doing entertainment in restaurants. It's really impacting women's lives. And I think, again, when you think about describing a financial situation or your mood in the country, if you're having to cut back on things, of course you're going to say that things are stressful and difficult. Then when we ask about what you think is the most important problem facing this country today, of course, the number one issue there is inflation as well. And I was sort of struck by the second one on the government and poor leadership as well in this question. 19% of women saying that as well. And then you see the economy is right there in sort of the third spot. Then when we look at issues that women care about when they are trying to decide who to support, who to vote for in upcoming elections, you still see the economy right there as the #1 issue. 2023 there in brown, and red was the 2022 number. So the economy is still a top issue, but we did see some pretty significant increases in some other issues between 2022 and 2023. Most notable, I think, you can see abortion has doubled, and that's not too surprising after Dobbs. And then you also see guns has more than doubled as an issue that women are thinking about when casting their vote, and also healthcare is increased as well. And then, speaking of reproductive rights and abortion, we did ask a couple of questions about abortion, but you can see in this one, majorities believing that abortion should be available and or the government should be kept out of those decisions. And you can see that's pretty consistent among the different demographics. Of course, you see a difference there in the Republican vote, and you see a difference in rural people who are from rural areas, and then, of course, much more of a pro-choice component among college-educated women as well. So that is just a brief overview of women not feeling like they're in a good place.
And we were talking with Laura ahead of just beforehand,
Yeah.
and the issue of the kind of second shift came up, which
Yeah.
is the kind of sociological term for women doing more than their share perhaps of the housework and childcare and things like that. And it strikes me that, especially related to, you mentioned the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I wonder if those are sort of related in some ways, that we've sort of seen this. I also expected that there would be this sort of, things would be the worst in the pandemic and
Yeah,
things would get
we
better,
were getting
right?
back to normal.
And now I'm wondering if, sort of reorienting towards this new normal
Yeah.
might be related to having, that the real pressure may be on that, those kind of additional things that women are more likely to do.
Yeah, I think that's a factor for sure. And I also think, even just childcare, I don't think has become more accessible since the pandemic, probably less so. A lot of childcare facilities still really aren't kind of back to normal, and so maybe that's impacting as well. But I was, definitely struck by the continuing kind of still burnout. And, us women, we put more on a plate, then we put more on our plate, right? And so maybe it's just a factor of, continuing to feel like we are having to do a lot more, like you said, at home, to do a lot more, in the workplace. I think there is this notion of kind of the new normal when it comes to work, where we think flexibility can be a good thing, working from home can be a good thing, but maybe working from home can have its downsides too. Anybody that's tried to work from home with kids screaming in the background and wanting, a piece of you at all times, I'm sure can appreciate that. And then I think, also it's stressful for women to have to figure out how much do you have to be in the office when you think about your careers. And I think for young women here today too, that's interesting to think about too, is as you all enter the workforce in sort of this hybrid mode and don't get maybe enough of kind of the networking or the mentoring that we were able to have starting out in our jobs. I think we were going to see that play out when we think about women kind of moving up in careers. I think this notion of not being in the workplace is going to come back to maybe hurt us in a sense.
Interesting. And I remember reading a study a few years ago about women doing more of the sort of emotional labor in the household as well, the sort of kind of keeping the peace and knowing what everyone's doing and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And I imagine in the pandemic, that's probably gotten a lot worse as well.
Exactly, as things come back on the calendar, right? The 9,000 birthday parties and soccer games and everything else.
Plus all of the stress of
Exactly.
American.
Yeah.
Right. So I have to ask, because
Yes.
we're in New Hampshire.
Yes.
So what does this mean for 2024? What's your sense of, those don't look like great numbers to me for, let's say, an incumbent
Exactly,
Democratic president.
exactly. And it's very hard to do sort of the typical incumbent message of, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, right? And the answer to that for a lot of women is actually no, thank you very much, right? And so for the Democrats especially, and for the incumbent president, his message is gonna have to not be everything is fine and dandy. That's not gonna fly with women when they're seeing much of the opposite. So it's gonna have to be much more solution-driven messaging on how to get inflation under control, how to deal with some of these financial pressures that women are facing, much more than, look at all the great things that I've achieved, if you don't feel that,
And the chart that you had about all the issues related to healthcare and abortion, those things becoming more of an influence, it seems like those might be something that maybe the Democrats could make the most of.
Yes, and I think what you'll see is, and we saw this in the midterms, is in abortion playing kind of an outsized role in what would you traditionally think of as purple or reddish kind of states. I'm thinking of the Kansas and Michigan, Wisconsin, right? Because there was a more at stake, if you will, of women voters there who looked at a Republican legislature, a Republican governor, and thought, oh, my reproductive rights could very easily be impacted in that sort of a scenario, right? And do you see that now with more discussions about a national ban on abortion? Do you see that same kind of thinking in bluer states like the New Yorks and Californias of the world, where you might even see more Democratic voters out, or independent voters especially too, voting on that issue of abortion and motivating them more to vote, because now they too could think that their reproductive rights could go away.
Especially given the recent Supreme Court decision
Yeah.
related to medication abortions,
Yes.
right? That might, if those kinds of things, those would impact all states, right?
Exactly.
Not just
Exactly.
not federal to it.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So I don't want to, we could probably talk more about this for a long time, and you probably have questions, so write them down, and we'll come back
Yes.
to it. So I think, but it would be great to move on a little bit to maybe the second
Sure.
related to political engagement.
Yes, and that's a good segue into that. So let's see here. When we think about the stakes in the election, you can see here that a majority of women thinking that next year is going to be more important than most. So on one hand, we have women sort of not happy about the state of economy, but they do tend to want to be more politically engaged and participate more across the line. You see, most women thinking overall that this election is going to be more important than most. Some even thinking, 19% thinking it's going to be the most important election of their lifetime. And so this notion of engaging women politically, I think, is still something that should be at the top of mind. When we looked here about political engagement, and independents and voters over 40 have become more disengaged over the past few years. And we see that younger voters and parents of younger children are starting to catch up. So you can see that 43% of people are saying that everything going on these past couple of years has made me feel more disengaged and tuned out, where 57% say I've been more engaged and tuned into politics more than usual because of everything going on the past few years. And I think you could look at that 43% number and think, the people are in that bucket, right? Or maybe some, and we hit this in a later question, women who are kind of turned off by the political process, who feel it's too partisan, too polarizing, too uncomfortable, and maybe less politically engaged as a result.
I think that those independents, they're so much less engaged, right, than the partisans.
Exactly.
It's concerning.
Exactly. And then when we think about women being politically engaged, one of the things that women, when we talk about how do you engage in politics, one of the things that women say most often is that they talk to friends and family about politics. And you can see in this survey question, 60% of women saying that they talk every day, a few times a week, or about every month, so somewhat frequently, to friends and family about politics. But when you look at women who say that they don't talk very often to friends and family about politics, and this just struck me, is that 32% number, which is high. And the reason why they don't talk to friends and family is because it's too uncomfortable and too confrontational. We've all had that nightmare Thanksgiving dinner recently over the past couple of years, right? Where you can't bring up certain topics. And so I think this impacts women in a significant way because that is a way for us to engage, but things have become so polarizing and so uncomfortable within friend sets and families that it's something that some women are just avoiding altogether.
Just to add to that, I don't
Yeah.
want to interrupt, but
No.
I think it's, that to me is really interesting, and there's a fair amount of psychological literature about sort of women being more risk averse, and I was thinking about this in relation to your previous one about issues. I mean, if women care about abortion and guns and healthcare, those are things that maybe are uncomfortable to talk about with people that you maybe don't know all that well, or you don't maybe want to strike up a conversation with someone about that, not knowing how they might react.
Yeah, it's interesting because those are kind of motivating factors, and maybe factors where it's women can try to involve others and form groups and do protests and voter drives and all of those kind of things, but maybe in a little bit of a safer space, not necessarily converting other voters, but mobilizing people that feel the same. And maybe that's the way that we're going to see more women engaged, is kind of in that space of not having to persuade voters, but to mobilize people that agree with them.
So more consensus building.
Exactly.
Than, sort of
Exactly. Then we also wanted to look a little bit about distrust and information, and get a sense of various entities. We asked whether you trust information coming from various entities, social media sites you can see, not very much trust there. Total distrust, 73% of women totally distrusting social media. That's not all too surprising. National news organizations, 46% total distrust, 57% of Republicans distrusting national news organizations. You see, down the line there, local news is a little more trustworthy. The CDC, FDA, still we see high distrust among Republican women of those institutions, obviously left over from the pandemic. And high trust in women in elected office.
that gap between men in elected office and women in
Yes,
elected office.
a difference. It really is. Yeah. And then we also wanted to dive a little bit into distrust of elections and national elections and local elections. And we saw a very high degree of Republican women expressing distrust of how elections are run and the results of elections. And I think, you don't have to look much further than what we've been witnessing out of Fox in the Dominion lawsuit to see that that has translated into this really high level of distrust that Republican women have in national elections.
Can I just jump in on this?
Mhm.
So I just have a question. So this is tapping into, so the election officials that are running these elections though are the same people. So And so this is really about
It's-
trusting my local officials versus all the other local officials in other places, is that?
I think it comes down to sort of where we sort of nationalize this component of an unfair election, that it's rigged in such a way. I don't think people are thinking the city council position is rigged, but I think what we saw come after, the election 2020 is that notion of, the national.
But it's interesting because they're all on the same ballot.
Exactly.
So,
Which was also in 2020 how we would say, hey, wait, if you think that the election was rigged and your member of Congress was elected and that's okay, but the president didn't quite go your way, how do you explain that? Yeah, no.
Same set of ballots.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And then to that other point about women leaders that jumped out there as being more trustworthy on a lot of issues, we kind of ticked off some issues here and wanted to get women's thoughts about trusting women leaders on these issues. And you can see that when it comes to issues like childcare, issues of reproductive rights, paid family leave, large percentages of women said they trust women more to actually legislate and make decisions on those issues as well.
And just to jump in on this,
Yeah.
this is what I'm most interested in my own research,
Yeah.
so I promise I won't take up too much time. But what do you make of this in terms of for women candidates? Do you think that this, if you're doing a training for a candidate, do you think that this speaks to, some potential benefits of being a woman candidate in upcoming elections?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think women, and I think you'll see this as women run for office in their campaign commercials and their messaging on the stump, to talk about these issues because they resonate with voters, A, and B, they're trusted more on this issue.
And, I think especially, on the issues that really speak to women, right?
Yes.
I think they have an outsized impact on women.
Definitely. Family leave, reproductive rights, childcare, those definitely jump out.
And is it your sense that that this is more about voters kind of stereotyping women candidates, or do you think that the women candidates themselves sort of see these and kind of play up those strengths or frame their candidacy in certain ways? Do you think that it's sort of one more than the other?
I don't think it's a stereotype as much as I think it's just a relatability component. When and I think we've seen this over the past several years of women candidates really trying to be more authentic and kind of embrace whatever notion of their existence is real and talking about in real terms some of these issues that are important and why they're running. And most women are running for office because they want to solve a problem. Most men are running for office just because they want to have a new title. I think women want to run because they want to solve solutions. And I think when they can speak firsthand about an experience that they had in the healthcare system, an experience that they had on the issue of abortion, an experience that they had about childcare, I think that resonates with women voters in a real way, and that authenticity is there.
It did strike me, though, that I'm wondering if a Republican woman candidate might look at this list and not necessarily find it as hopeful. Because a lot of these play, I think, more to Democratic strengths than they do to Republican strengths.
Yeah, well, and I think that's also why you don't see as many Republican women talking about gender as much as you maybe do among Democratic women. And I think some of that is in a future slide too we can allude to as well.
Maybe we should jump there.
Yeah, you can jump in there.
A good statement.
We did ask a number of questions about women in political leadership. And one of the things we asked were about some particular entities, and we wanted to get a sense again of kind of favorability, unfavorability that women had toward different entities, local and national. You can see here that favorable opinions of local police departments, their school systems, their local officials, their own state governor, their local school board, and then you see, higher unfavorable ratings for President Biden, anything that gets super political. Kamala Harris, the Supreme Court, Trump, Republicans in Congress as well. And then when we think about, and this is the slide that I was alluding to, when we think about this notion of electing more women to office, and we asked women about their desire to see more women in office. And we asked them, thinking about the current number of women in political office, which comes closer to your view, and we saw some changes here, but among all women, we saw that 63% said that they were too few women in elected office. That was up about 8 points since we asked the same question in 2022. 32% said that there are about the right number of women in elected office. And then interestingly, when you look at independents, not so surprisingly that we would see high numbers of Democratic women saying that they're too few. But even among independent women, 70% saying that there are too few women in elected office, up 14 points since the last time we asked that question. And then when we look at Republican women, we see the large majority, that 57% there, kind of doing a collective shrug and saying, oh, it's fine, it's fine. And there's just not that tendency to sort of embrace the issues of gender and women in politics as much on the Republican side. And that's been the case for a long, long time. And so that's where, to your point, you see kind of Republican women not only and not embracing as much about Republican women running for office, but not talking as much about some of the issues.
Right. And just to jump in real quick,
Yeah.
that I think, I was wondering that independent number.
Yeah.
Do you think that, have you seen more interest in potential women candidates thinking about running for office because of these issues sort of being out in the culture more?
Yeah, I think we saw the biggest jump after 2016. After the Trump election, I think we saw, a lot more women deciding to run. I think we'll see. I think there's issues of partisanship. There's issues of, again, this, the economic situation, the burned out situation, where it might be harder. It might be harder for women to kind of take that leap and make a run for office now, as well. Let's see, we just have a few more things I wanted to go through. Women believing that women leaders are going to do a better job of understanding their challenges. Again, to a similar point that we were talking about. We see a big, even an uptake from 2022 among women who say that if there were more women in political office, it would help us do a better job of dealing with the country's problems. As well as women running for political office have a better understanding of the challenges I face in my life and what it would help me do to get ahead. Again, going to back to that point that we were talking about. And then when we specifically were looking at the next woman president, we asked an interesting question of whether women thought that there would be a woman president in the next 20 years. And you can see 85% agreeing that we will see a woman as president in the next 20 years. But less so that it was not important for it to happen now. Again, we see women, and this is especially true when of younger women, don't really see the need to vote for somebody just because they're a woman. Like, the ideology of the person matters much, much more than whether they're a male or female. And so we see that in this question as well. And then as we think about some various aspects of the 2024 candidates, we asked whether a presidential candidate that is opposed to abortion is a deal breaker for a majority. And you can see that 56% of women say that they're less likely to support a candidate who is opposed to abortion rights. You see that 47% are more likely to support a woman for president. But then we also had to ask this age question, given our field of candidates, and 67% of women so that they would be less likely to support a presidential candidate over the age of 80. So we'll see what that means. And then I'll end here on this slide of women who, we asked about, certain women in elected office who women admire the most. You can see this list. I know you're having Nikki Haley here in a couple days. She's on the list. And then, how important it is to elect women to office. And we see 82% of women agreeing that it is important to elect women to political office and to have equal representation.
So it is interesting because Republican women here, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, but that Republican women here, right, are still saying that it is either very important or somewhat important.
Yeah,
Overwhelming.
exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That those two things exist side by side.
Yeah.
Good. Well, so maybe we should, we've got about 20 minutes left, and I'm happy to ask more questions, but I'm sure you probably have some as well. So we actually have some students here who are kind enough to hold the microphones for us so that we can hear you and get you on tape, just so you know. And so if you have a question, I think we have one over here. You can start. And so just speak into the microphone when you ask the question. And if you want to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Amy Quaid. I'm actually
Put it on. There we go. No.
Hello, hello.
There we go. Got you.
Hi, my name is Katie McQuaid, and I am a member of the NHIOP School of Communications. And I'm wondering, what are the biggest barriers to women getting into politics? And do you see a difference in the age that women get into politics? We talked about women and burnout, and I think the word that we're looking for is mental load. Women in relationships, we do take on that mental load more than men do. And do you see women getting into politics later, maybe after their kids have grown, and missing out on some of those opportunities before then?
I think there's a couple of factors. I think the time issue is a real one to get to that point. I think the nastiness of politics is a big one. I think especially when we think about online harassment that exists so much now, that for women to put themselves and their families in that situation, and actual physical violence as well. I think that can be significant. And I think when we think about financial, most people don't realize, but when you think about elected positions like state legislatures in many places are part-time. And women, sometimes it's hard to afford to take a job that pays, a part-time job that pays, in some cases, $12,000, $14,000 a year. To take a job like that, the people that can afford to take those kind of jobs are typically older, more established, and probably male. And that women who are relied upon to not only do things for their families, but have an income as well, it's hard to take that hit and to be able to take a job like that when the pay for some of these, as we would think, the kind of elected positions that you would think, are kind of the stepstones for a higher elected office, like a governor or presidential candidate, can sometimes just be economically not feasible for women. And so I think those are kind of the top three that I hear anecdotally, and then I think you can see in different surveys as well. I think some of the some things have gotten better. I think fundraising used to be a big, women can't fundraise as well, or I don't know how to fundraise. I think women are overcoming that in a big way and are having a lot of success in raising money, and there are more groups out there that are supporting women candidates on both sides, Republican and Democratic, that can try to help women get through some of this primary process. And so maybe that's one thing that I think is less of a factor than maybe it used to be.
And we've mentioned before, I think, underestimating qualifications, right?
Of course.
Thinking of yourself as less qualified, even though you might be just as qualified, right?
Exactly. And in fact, I don't have a slide on it in this poll, but we had also asked the question about when we think about being politically engaged, what sort of prevents you from doing that as well. And we see lots of reasons for that, and the same kind of thing there as well.
Right. That's a really great question. And I do think, my sense is that it was the case 20, 30 years ago that women were much older when they ran for office.
Yes.
But that number has come down, I think, a little bit in terms of I don't think women are putting off running for office quite as much as they were before. Because I think it's become a little bit more normalized that you can, sort of have a child while you're in office, and but it is.
Yeah,
the
although we
childcare-
still have, we had our little graduation the other day for our campaign training program, and one of the women who spoke to us was a city council person, and she said when she first ran for office, she got the question, and another speaker who's a former member of Congress also got the question of when they were campaigning with young children, who's watching your kids? That still exists, believe it or not.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? We have some over here.
I don't want to be that guy, but it's not a question. I just wanted to share that in the New Hampshire legislature, the state legislature here, we have 2 female reps, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, who recently had children and bring their infants to the legislature with them and hold them.
Yeah.
Or let other people hold them, which is kind of great, while voting is happening. And I think one of them nurses on the House floor. And in New Hampshire, the state reps make $100 a year. And it can be full-time if you want to really invest in yourself.
Right. But 20 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that, right? In terms of having kids. And we even see that in political campaigns, too. I remember several women who were running in 2020 were doing campaign ads in their minivan, with kids in the back seat. And, speaking of authenticity, like, this is my life. I'm a mom of 3 and I'm running for office, right?
Right. That's a really interesting point, and that's a hopeful story.
Yes,
actually.
exactly.
That's great.
Thank you
Although
for sharing
I don't think it was all that long ago that the women in Congress, they had to actually lobby for a bathroom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good. There's another hand over here.
Thanks. Oh. Is it working now?
There you go.
So you mentioned the Dobbs effect and that pro-choice women had felt especially galvanized to vote against measures that would limit their right or completely restrict the right to an abortion. Is there any evidence that the same thing is happening the opposite way, where women who are pro-life especially feel galvanized now that they might, for the first opportunity, have the ability to vote to completely restrict that right?
I think certainly if that is Republican women, can feel galvanized about that component. I just think that there's less of them. And so you don't see the numbers as much as you would see among Democratic women. But certainly, as pro-life Republican women probably feel just as strongly, right, as their counterparts on the other side. It's just that there's not as many of them as that they are on the other side.
One thing that I thought was really concerning, not to be the political science professor, but the low numbers of trust in the Supreme Court, that struck me as something that, might be a potential source of crisis of legitimacy in terms of our broader democracy.
Exactly, but not surprising, right? Given what we've seen,
Right.
to a certain extent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, why don't we go over here?
Hi, yes. My name is Sharon Monroe, and I'm a volunteer with AARP Voter Engagement
Oh, great.
Capital City Task Force. So welcome and thank you for your
Thank you.
presentation. So you mentioned the monthly newsletter. Is that available to the public?
Oh,
or-
yeah.
Yeah, is there, can we get how to sign up for that?
Yeah, if you go to our website, it's the Women and Politics Institute at American University, there's, you should see a link it's called the We Lead Reader, it's called. Thank you for the plug. This was not a plant. If you have any
I was
problem,
going to ask at the end.
if you have
so-
any problem finding it, just send me an email. My
Okay.
email's on there, or Twitter, or whatever, and I'm happy to sign you up for it. Or if you have a card, I'll take it afterwards and sign you up myself for it. So yeah, and we are actually, speaking of AARP, we are getting ready to do a program with the Institute and AARP in a couple of weeks about the economic power that women over 50 have. So there should be information on our website in the next couple of days about that you might be interested in. Yeah, from some of the great research that AARP is doing on that topic. So, thank you.
This gentleman.
My name is Harry Kimball. I'm also AARP. I personally would love to see more females running for office, as long as they're out like Margaret Taylor Greene. But the question that I want to ask you is, a lot of things were done in the last Congress. Infrastructure, climate change, and there's a number of things that are going to not take effect until next year or the year after. I think our future is rosy. Why does it seem to be that people aren't taking that into account?
I think it's just the personal impact of every day when, you know, you go to the grocery store and you're paying exorbitant amounts for food and you see, you know, your bank account dwindling and it's costing more to do activities that you would normally do. I think it's kind of a human reaction. Like we don't have really, no one's thinking, but oh, all this passed and in a couple years it'll be better. They're just the impact of the here and now is just so real that it's hard for, I think, people to kind of think beyond that. But we do know that, you know, women, not only do they feel the pressure, but they are pessimistic about change happening in the future. They're pessimistic about things getting better.
There could be a certain level of uncertainty, I would think, related to, you know, are we going to go into a recession? Is the inflation going to get better? That
Right,
kind of
and they
uncertainty.
just haven't seen signs of improvement thus far.
Yeah, great. Other questions? Go over here and we'll go back.
Hello, my name is Lorelei Godfrey, and I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I wanted to ask, what are strategies to improve women's political participation?
Great question. One is to
Go to the AU training
yeah, well, yeah, run for office, but encourage other women too to run for office. And we know that encouragement, you know this from political science, the encouragement component is a real thing for women. Most need to be encouraged 2 or 3 times by somebody to actually run for office. And so that's a real thing that makes an impact. But, you know, also, you know, engaging women, forming groups, you know, joining a campaign, being campaign volunteers, you know, getting together with other women to advocate for change is definitely a motivator in many respects. But that encouraging other women, I think, to run for office makes a big difference. And then I also think, you know, the power of seeing other women in elected office has a multiplier effect. I think, you know, even though we didn't end up with a female nominee last cycle in 2020 on the Democratic side, I think the power of seeing, you know, 6 women up on that debate stage was real for a lot of people, and I think will pay dividends down the road as well. And we now have, by the way, a record number of female governors in this country. 12, it's not enough, but I mean, it's a record, so we'll take it. But I think that has an impact as well.
And I think there is, political scientists have noted that there's actually a knowledge gap between men and women, and it starts relatively young. So I think, you know, talking to your friends about politics and having that become normalized, that as something that women talk about and care about, I think can be a way to just start that even on an individual level.
Absolutely.
Emma has a question in the back.
This working? Okay. My name's Emma. I'm a senior politics major here at St. Anselm. This is kind of a specific piece of like data on your slide, but the one where it said that a lot of people want to see a woman president within the next 20 years, but significant number less can see it in 2024. I kind of was wondering what you thought, why not 2024? See, it's like half, it's not even close to as many.
Yeah.
Is it just not people seeing candidates they like, or like what will it take? Or is this like a mythical woman candidate in the future?
Yeah, one was more sort of, predictive, will there be a woman in the next 20 years? And the other question was, the importance to a woman voter, the importance of the presidential candidate that you support to be a woman. And I think you hit that when you said, there's not a lot of, we don't see a lot of women out there right now running. We see, I guess Nikki Haley on the Republican side. We don't see a Democratic primary right now, with the exception of Marianne Williamson maybe, right? But I think that there's not a lot of women sort of on the horizon. And I also think, again, we're in a situation where I think voters, women voters in particular as well, they are going to vote on their ideology. It's much more important to them to, for example, on the Democratic side, to support somebody who they think can defeat a Donald Trump again, right? I mean, you see us, we actually vote like political scientists in many ways, right? We are political pundits. Like, we think, okay, who are we going to support? Well, we're going to support somebody that can win in the fall because there's a lot at stake, and so there's less of a inclination, I think, to be as specific on the issue of a woman running for office than having somebody that, depending on your ideology, can win in a general election.
So that 57% who want to support a woman in 2024 among 18 to 25-year-olds?
Yeah.
That seems hopeful, though, that younger people are
important.
Thinking that it's an important goal.
Mm-hmm.
It does, I guess the problem potentially, though, is that myth of progress, that you just sort of assume that it will happen at some point, but you don't actively do anything to make it happen.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Or that we need, we need more women to be in the field and to run.
Right. So we have 5 minutes, so probably one or two more questions, right in the back there.
Hi, Marilyn Hoffman. For those of us who work on campaigns, you had some figures on independence, and it looked promising for more progressive side of independence. I don't know if you have any feeling of, when you talk to independents, if they're really more Republicans than Democrats, or, because a lot of them actually are something, but they register as independents.
Yeah.
And when we work on campaigns, the two parties tend to focus on people in their own party and not reach out enough to independents, but it looked like, at least for the Democrats, it might be a really important step to reach out to independents and identify those voters who might be sympathetic to Democrats this year.
Yeah,
Do you have any feel about independents?
Well, that's a great question. I think in a lot of the data that we saw when we talked about issues and the way independents felt, there was definitely much more of a skew toward Democratic policies among independents than we saw toward Republican policies. And so when you think about, persuasion or messaging to kind of that middle, I think there is kind of a built-in issue advantage right now, especially when we think about abortion being, I think, chief among those issues.
And maybe as the campaign progresses, as somebody mentioned before, that we'll hear more about some of what the Biden administration has done, and they'll make the case to independents about what they've accomplished already.
Exactly.
Good, yes, I think we have one more in the back.
Hi, you showed a little bit about differences among Black and Latina respondents. Can you talk a little bit more within the survey overall about where you saw differences that were important, if you did?
Yeah, I think in some of the economic numbers, I think we saw Black voters, I can just switch back to kind of some of the early slides is where we did more of a breakdown. Here on, the issues of burnout among Black voters, 19%, 19 points up from 2022 of feeling more burnout. And I can't explain the Latina number as being much less. I don't know why that is. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Jennifer, on why that's sort of a less of a flip there. It could be, I don't know. I don't know why that is, but that's one area where we saw more of a difference among Black voters in some of those crosstabs that we looked at. Here also on that reproductive rights issue, we saw more of an inclination to kind of personally be against abortion, but not believing that the government should prevent someone from making that decision for themselves. That number jumped out there as well. So those were the main two that we saw.
Okay, well, we're actually right about 7 o'clock, so I'm pretty impressed that we stayed
Well,
on time.
thank you so much for the terrific questions. And all these slides are on our website, on the Gender on the Ballot website as well, if anybody wants to look more in depth into them.
And we want to thank all of you very much for coming. Please grab another cup of coffee on your way out, and have a good night.
Thank you.